Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, monomiliwanji, namaste, jumbo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jedley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We're coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We're so delighted and so very honored that you join us in our mission to help all families grow closer through reading. Please be sure to tell all of your family and friends about the show. Please be sure to tell your kids' teachers, their principal, their librarian, and also please be sure to subscribe to the show in the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Stitcher Radio, wherever you find your podcasts. Our guest today is Molly Webster. She is here to celebrate Little Black Hole. Before we invite Molly into the studio, we want to invite all of the authors listening to the podcast to visit our website, readingwithyourkids.com. Please click on the authors click here button that you find at the top of the page. We want you to find out how you can submit your book to our Reading with Your Kids Certified Great Read panel. If they believe that your book is worthy of 4 or 5 out of 5 stars, it becomes a certified great read. And with that status comes a number of really powerful tools that can help your book stand out from the crowd of books that are published every single month. Did you know that there are literally thousands of books published every single, you thought I was going to say year. No. Every single month, there are thousands of books published every single month. It is really hard to get noticed in that crowd of books, especially if you are a self-published author or published by a small independent publishing house. We can help you. We can help parents, grandparents, teachers, caregivers know that your book is worthy of a place in your family library. Check it out today. Readingwithyourkids.com. Click on the authors click here button at the top of the page and scroll on down to Certified Great Reads. Join us right now from behind a Starbucks somewhere in the island of Staten in New York City. Our guest is here today to celebrate her beautiful children's picture book. Is called The Little Black Hole. Please welcome to the show, Molly Webster. Hey, Molly, how are you?
Hey, how are you? I'm good.
I'm hoping that you're safe and secure there in Staten Island. We appreciate the links you've gone through to be able to be on the podcast here today.
I'm very excited. I was saying my car is in the shop, but I found a cozy spot behind a Starbucks next to a banana peel and a rat trap.
I won't ask if there's anything in the rat trap.
I haven't looked at
she doesn't know. So tell us, I guess in some ways a rat trap can be like for a rat, like a little black hole. You know, once you go in, you know, it never came out.
Yeah. That's a sweet stretch. But yes, no, my book, which is coming out in May, I don't actually know when this podcast comes out, but when it comes out in May, it's called Little Black Hole, and it's a children's picture book for ages 3 to 8, and it's the first one that I've ever written, and it's been so fun. I started writing it actually right when the pandemic started, and here we are 3 years later. And I can tell you all about why I think humans are like little black holes.
Well, I can't.
It is a fictional book. I should say it's fiction based on real science that I'm sort of using metaphorically.
Well, I want to talk about all those things and all the ways that people are like little black holes. But, you know, I think, I don't know, you might have a different idea about this, but there have been so many books and so many podcasts. I know that before the pandemic there was just a little bit over 500,000 podcasts. Now there's 12 billion in the world. But it's like I think at some point when we get further and further away from it, we might look back at the pandemic as like the great cultural revolution, because so many books and things were started during that time.
The pandemic was a really interesting. I can't speak for everybody, but I'll say the pandemic was a really interesting time for me. In two ways. Like, one, I'm originally from Ohio, and so during the pandemic, I moved back to, or during this part of the pandemic, the first part of 2020, in March, when all of the shelter-in-place orders came down, I moved back to Ohio from where I live in Brooklyn, and I moved in with my best friend from growing up and my basically adopted nephew, and their family, and it was an interesting moment because I haven't lived, back in Ohio or near family in like quite some time. And so at one level, while the whole world was shut down and it felt really scary and was like a super isolated time, it was also a moment where I felt very satiated by love in certain ways because I was like ensconced in family again, and then it was just us, like there was nothing else to do. And there were no other people to see, there was nothing else being asked of me, there was no travel. And in fact, like, I'm from Ohio, but my family is really spread all around the States, and so I spend a lot of time like going and seeing them, which is really fun. But it was also like this pandemic was the first time like I couldn't do that. I was just in a place, and I was back in a lot of nature, which I really love. And my friends really like watching TV, and I don't necessarily. Like, there are certain things I like in small spurts. But so we kind of had this routine where we would put my nephew to bed at 8 p.m. and then my friend and her husband would want to like settle in on the couch and like watch television, and I was like, I want to go outside and like make a bonfire and stare at the stars and contemplate like this craziness that's happening all around us right now. And I'll let this ambulance go by. And in that moment, I just had space to be like, well, I don't know, what do I want to do with my time? And I had this idea for doing a children's book with a little black hole as the main character, a fiction book, and I just thought, why don't I try it? And I had a couple of other pieces of writing that I wanted to do too, as well, that, essays and things. And so I would just spend some of my evenings and like free time just with my laptop on the back porch trying to write some things. And it was a really creative moment for me.
That's wonderful. Yeah. I love that, how you had an opportunity to get out of the city. One of the things that really kind of blew me away, I live in Boston, but in the most suburban wilderness part of Boston you can find. And many times my wife and I would just need to get out of the house, and we would drive through downtown Boston, which was deserted, but we'd look up at in the big canyon of these high-rise apartment buildings that people are paying so much money for, and that are about as big as the bed that I'm lying down on, or sitting on right now, and thinking to ourselves how horrible it must be to be stuck in those little bird cages for all this time.
I felt really lucky I felt really lucky to be able to go have space. Like I could walk around in fields or soccer fields or the suburbs, with a freedom that I didn't feel when I was in Brooklyn. But I did also feel a missing of community, because there is a thing about New York and cities in Brooklyn, and I live in a really community-based neighborhood where people really look out for each other, and everyone was sort of like tucked in together. So I did see that from the outside, that sort of like level of like hunkered down, we're in the bunker together, that can often sweep through New York City when something big happens. And I heard from a lot of people that in and of itself was like a really powerful shared communal experience. But for where I was in my life, like at the time, the place I needed to be was like with family. Yeah.
So Little Black Hole, in some ways, I'm reading, touches on the loneliness, and that we're trying kind of talking about.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's funny to say that I started it at the pandemic because it is a book about loneliness and anxiety and feeling far away from people that you love. And I think if I heard myself say, oh, this author started this at the beginning of the pandemic, like that really must have been where she was at. And so it inspired her. I think I may just be at that all the time. Like I think I may have like a subtle line of just being aware that people that I love are often quite far away. Mm-hmm. And so that's a current that runs through me and I've always sort of been in touch with. And actually the book originally started, it originally started from a place of thinking about how black holes look on the outside to be destructive, mm-hmm. right? It's a space in space where things disappear into it, or things are crushed by it, or things are changed by it, and then that affects the space, the universe. And so, but then learning about some of the science of black holes, which is actually in the very last page of Little Black Hole, some of the science is there. Learning about the science of the black holes, I realize they also have so much beauty attached to them, right? Like in a way, they're trying to tell their stories to the rest of the universe by radiating off, small particles that reveal what might be inside of them, and having relationships with stars and other objects that are around them. And I remember sort of learning these things about black holes and thinking, wow, they're like sort of destructive, but they're beautiful. Mm-hmm. And bumping into humans in the world who felt destructive but beautiful, or who identified as destructive but couldn't see their beauty. And so the book originally really started from a place of wanting to capture like a feeling like you mess up space, but you're really maybe also contributing to it. And then when I started writing the book, I realized that there were sort of two competing narratives happening. One was like a narrative of destruction and trying to cope with that, and another was a narrative of loneliness and trying to cope with that. And at that moment, for me, and whatever spurred this on, the narrative that was flowing more freely was the narrative of loneliness and anxiety, and wondering where people were and how to be connected with them. And so hopefully there will be many more Little Black Hole character books, because I have a lot of ideas, but the one that has come forth first is this one about loneliness.
Yeah. I think if I ever hear another person tell me, oh, writing a kid's book must be really easy, and you just get a couple of cute animals together, and you're talking about a blueberry pie, and then the book is done. I'm going to have them listen to this and go, no, dude, there's a lot of thought goes into kids' books.
It was such an awesome writing experience, because I think in a introverted life, I like to play around with poetry. It's not something I widely share, but writing short is incredibly hard. But there's such a beautiful like rhythm and cadence to it. And I think as a person who's been working in audio and has been an audio, radio, podcast maker for like the last 10 years or more, I have gotten really used to thinking about like rhythms and sounds and how it all sounds. And so, and I honestly love kids' books. Like I read a lot of them. I have them on my shelves. I don't have any kids at this moment in time, but like I really enjoy them. And so it's interesting because I often hear that writers will write what they know. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh, it's not actually crazy that the first book I tried to write was a kid's book, because it's like they were so special to me growing up. But then it was really interesting learning the process, because writing tightly, writing efficiently, like one of the things I learned when I was pitching the book is most kids' picture books are 32 pages. And so it's like, what does that mean? What does that look like? You don't have a lot of words on each page. And then the editor that I worked with, Talia Bellamy at Philomel, which is under Penguin, like really was an amazing writing guide. Like, there were so many thoughts about, like, well, like, what's happening with the little black hole, and how is she developing as a character, and she needs to have some sort of, like, recognition, and there needs to be some sort of, like, emotion that needs to be, like, overcome, like, really walking through things and then really biting into, like, grammar. It was such a fun writing process. I feel like I learned so much about writing from writing 32 pages that are probably, I've never looked at the word count, but the word count can't be that big, you know?
Mm-hmm. One of the things you just mentioned, there's so much in there I want to get to, but one of the things that we often hear about writing is write what you know. And that certainly is true. But one of the interesting things, we've had so many amazing authors on the show, and so many really, so many of the titans of children's literature. Jerry Spinelli, Jane Yolen, who's written over 400 books. And both of them and others have come on the show, and they said, write what you know, write what you love.
Yeah.
And it sounds like you are writing in Little Black Hole. You're also writing about what you know, but you're also writing about the loneliness and relationships that you find so valuable in your life.
Yeah, I think that's really true. I think that the medium of children's books, and also huge Janet Yolen stan, like Owl Moon, I will talk about it to anyone that will listen, has been on my bookshelf since I was like 5. I love it so much. But yeah, I think children's books are a space that I feel a lot of, like, joy and beauty. I think, like, my favorite children's books are ones that don't talk down to kids, but are really, like, about the magic and space and beauty and complications and darkness in the world, and do it with a lot of mischievousness and joy and laughter, even when tackling, like, tricky things, and artistry. But then, I think, the more and more that I think I became more convinced as I was writing the book and thinking about the character of Little Black Hole, that we are all little black holes, and that I identify with some of the metaphors that sit there very closely. And there is always a question, I grew up, I'm the youngest of 4 sisters, and we lived, sort of in a pretty rural area of Ohio, and I often had a feeling that, like, everyone would, like, go out into the world, and I was sort of still back in this area of Ohio, and I'd be like, what are they doing out there, and how do you get to the world, and, like, what is it like out there? And then they would come back and have stories and dip back into my life for a little bit, and then kind of go off again, and I found so much inspiration in them, but I also was always like, no, don't go, like, please stay, like, everyone's leaving. And so I think there's probably, I'm wondering about all of the people listening to this who are the youngest, and, like, if that has any familiarity, or if it's just me and my, like, very romantic, bittersweet soul, that has that feeling. So I think that's always been present. And then just, on the journey to, like, pursue a career in writing, and I do science journalism and stuff. I do a lot of traveling, and have ended up in a city that I very much love, New York City, but is not centered around, like, immediate family, or, and I've had close friends here, and a lot of close friends leave, and so there's a lot of aching and yearning sometimes of for community, or for wondering, like, what it means when people are far, but you have this, like, deep, deep, rich connection with them. And it's funny because the ending of Little Black Hole stumped me for a while. Like, what happens when, I don't know how much to reveal, but, like, what happens when she sort of realizes that even though in a way she can't see her family and friends, that they're with her, like, what does that mean to a person? And I have had different moments of, like, what that means to me. And the one that I settled on for the book is, like, often in those, in moments when I'm feeling lonely or really far away from people, honestly thinking about them and knowing that they're out there aware of me and loving me, like, even though they're far away, it really fortifies me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, like, I have the strength of them behind me. They want me to do good in the world. And there's a lot that's happening in the book that can also be that's about life and death. You know, like, people can be missing or far away in a lot of different ways. And so I do think I wrote, to go all the way back to your first point, like, wrote from a place that feels really personal.
Yeah, yeah. One of the things you mentioned early on, and I hope I paraphrase this correctly, is that sometimes we see ourselves as destructive and we aren't able to see how beautiful we are. And I think that is something that an awful lot of people struggle with. Mm-hmm. You know? Yeah,
it's I totally agree. Like, probably myself in certain circumstances where you're just like, oh, I did it again. I did that thing again where I don't know. It could be anything. Asked too much of somebody, or felt too complicated, or like all of these things, you know. But then at the same time, it's like that's being so hard on yourself and not like accepting yourself, and not also seeing the ways that the things that can in some moments be hard are in other moments like your superpower, you know, and that we are two sides of every coin. And yeah, it's just, I really do think, like, in a way, like, destruction and beauty, destruction and grace, like, probably go hand in hand. Mm-hmm. And you just have to figure out how to hold the destruction and, like, not totally annihilate as you go, you know. But it really is like a struggle. Like, it's interesting. I meditate a lot, and there's a lot, I realized kind of in hindsight that there's a lot about acceptance and impermanence in this book that fits into like a world of meditation and sort of understanding who we are, and understanding that things that in some instances can be faults are also features and assets. And yeah, and I've definitely moved through the world and bumped into people. I mean, I remember a very specific conversation with a friend, and he was saying, oh, I'm so destructive. And I was like, yeah, but you're also so good. But like, if you just focus on the destruction, your destruction is going to be everything. Mm-hmm. And like, what you need is to, like, yes, there are these ways you're destructive, and like, sometimes that's not useful. Let's figure out how to heal that. But then there are these other ways in which you're not destructive, and like, let's figure out how to like amp that up and boost that up in your world, because in a way it is a self-fulfilling prophecy. Mm-hmm. Like, if you're just seeing your destruction, you will just destruct more and more.
Yeah. I'm you know, you were mentioning talking to your friend about that part of those parts of his life. I'm thinking that this can be a really wonderful conversation to have with our kids. People might be sitting there going, oh, that's really heavy to have with a 5 or a 6-year-old, but you don't have to have the same conversation you had with your friend. But I mean, there are kids. I know myself, my daughter, and at different times my son, when they were younger, they had those moments of deep introspection where, oh, I'm not the best person in the world. Mm-hmm. I did something that's really kind of lousy, and I could have been better, and I don't feel good about myself this time. Mm-hmm. And I think that this could be a great conversation to have with our kids, to say, hey, we're yin and yang. We're not all one thing all the time. We're, you know.
Yeah, and to require sort of a perfection of ourselves. It's just not, you're always striving to be better. And I've had this conversation I'm so lucky to have so many nieces and nephews who I get to see and hang out with, like, quite often, especially now that we can all get back on planes again. And I just had this conversation with one of my nephews who was having like a really hard time on his brother's birthday, you know, and he was feeling like unseen, and he was really struggling to be generous as like his brother kept getting gifts, and he just was having a hard time. And then was so bummed with himself that he was having a hard time. Like, he was like, I'm really happy that it's his birthday, but I feel sad that, like, he got a cool thing that I wish I got. But then I feel bad that I feel sad about that. And so this was a real conversation that we had about just, that's how you're feeling right now, and those feelings are okay, and it's really how you deal with the feelings, like how you express yourself, and this singular moment, or that moment when you got mad because he got something you wanted, that doesn't, like, define you. Mm-hmm. You know, it's just one moment in, like, a whole series of moments. And it was so, I mean, yeah, these are real conversations that I have with young people all the time.
Yeah. And I think if and I have those same conversations with young people, and have had them since my kids were young, and they're now adults. And they're really awesome conversations to have, because it allows a kid to go in deep and to really kind of explore a part of themselves that they don't have a chance to explore. And also, you were mentioning earlier, you don't like books that talk down to kids. I mean, talk about a way to let a kid know that you respect them as a human being. You're not looking down on them. You don't think that you're better or smarter or whatever than them. Having these kind of conversations where you're sharing some wisdom, and you're both kind of sitting back and going, I don't really know the answer to that, but it's fun talking about.
Yeah, and I've been super impressed with my sisters, really watching them as they raise kids to try to model that as well. Like, oof, I just had a bad moment there, or this is a moment I, as a parent or as a person, can learn from, and I'm going to try and do this in front of and with my kids so that they see this model and can go through it as well. That we are many-sided coins, and that's okay. And it's, it's not even a lesson I think I've learned for myself, but it's like, and I think it's for all of us, a constant practice every day.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I got to tell you, I'm having a blast. Little Black Hole sounds like a lot of fun.
I love it so much.
Sounds like a book that can just spur so many conversations. But before we go, I also know, and you shared with us a little bit, that you are in radio, you're in podcasting. Where can people go and tell us just a little bit more about the audio that you're creating?
Yeah, so the audio that I create is with a show called Radio Lab, which is an audio documentary program that dives a ton into science. So I do a lot of science reporting, and I just love stories that are about where science and humanness meet, where they bump up against each other. So I've been doing a lot of stories about the ways our bodies know what is us and what is not us. Like, if you think about immune systems need to protect us and keep whatever is other out. And like, so I've been doing a lot of stories looking at that relationship between, like, sort of us and our boundaries of skin and cells, and then, like, interacting with the rest of the world. But yeah, those stories. And I also do, one of my most favorite stories that I did ever, which kids would love, and we have, like, a kids feed and is on our kids feed, is about what happens to a caterpillar when it crawls inside a chrysalis, what it actually goes through to turn into a moth or a butterfly. And it's such a great, fun story. Great sound design. Radio Lab does a ton of sound design and sound effects, and there's, like, music composition, and it's silly and irreverent and profound. And so it's on, like, terrestrial radio, like if you turn actually on a radio dial, but it's also on podcasts. And it's great fun. Yeah, it's great fun. And I've always really enjoyed science, and Little Black Hole is based on real science. It's based on something called Hawking radiation, which is this idea that black holes can suck things in, and even though they look like they disappeared, they can release particles out of, like, the top, whatever the top of a black hole is. and they can sort of reveal the mysteries of what's hidden inside them. Very much like a black box or a chrysalis or like these types of things that I've reported on before.
Yeah. Isn't it going to be so cool if we live long enough to discover what's really inside a black hole?
Oh my gosh, yeah, because right now they can't. This is all theoretical,
Mm-hmm.
you know, it's all based on math that I don't understand, but we don't have any kind of telescopes or materials that would allow us to know that. But like, man, how crazy would it be if we did,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Mm-hmm.
And there's all sorts of interesting questions about black holes. Like, what was the first black hole ever? And where did it appear and why, you know? And all the way down to just like how black holes interact with the things around them. Like most black holes have something called a companion star, which I just think of as like a little buddy in space, a little best friend that floats around with them.
Very cool.
Yeah. And I will say, one of the things I super love about the book are the illustrations.
Mm-hmm.
Like Alex Wilmore, who I have never met, made these insanely gorgeous, color-drenched representations that are silly and joyous and fun and sad, and just really celebratory and mischievous of like the universe and Little Black Hole and all of her friends, which include a space fox and some fun comets. and that was really a joy to see that world come to life in a visual way, which is, you know, beyond what my hand can draw.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm encouraging people to get out there and check out Little Black Hole, and also check out what you're doing over in Radio Lab. In the meantime, where can people go to find out more about you and all the great creative things coming from your mind?
Where can they go to find out more about me? Right now, I would just send them to my website, which is mollytwebster.com. I, go back and forth on social media. Right now, I'm not on it.
Well, we love the fact that we had a chance to talk to you. We love that nothing crawled out of that rat trap that you're sitting next to.
At least nothing that made me scream.
We had a great time speaking to the author of Little Black Hole, Molly Webster. Molly, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much, Jed. This has been fun.
Please be sure to join us for the next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Our guest will be Marie Tang. She'll be here to celebrate Eunice Cardboard Castles. That's the next episode of the podcast. I want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. Of course, I want to start by thanking our guest, Molly Webster. Be sure to check out Little Black Holes. Also want to thank my team, Fatima Khan, Rory Grady, Will Cheever, Jordan Staley, Cassandra Masonnet, Stephanie Davila. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. Most of all, we all want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today, and as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.